no matter where you go in the world outside of the West, the developed countries, you cannot count on your national police or even your ambassador and the embassy to help you out if you get in trouble. They will claim it's out of sovereignty, blah, 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 but at the end of the day, they won't get involved. The only way out is to carry in a big bag of cash. Don't travel outside the West until you've watched this video. If you've ever traveled outside your comfortable Western country or have considered doing so, there's an important little tidbit of information I'd like to share with you. What I'm going to detail for you is the fact that our judicial system and our police system in the West tends to have a completely incorrect view of what the rest of the world is like and how to operate with them. I read my posts because I don't really ad-lib all that well and I need a script. So here goes. Originally titled, Our Developed World Glasses Tend to be Rose-Colored, Third World Travel Tip. Considering travel outside the developed world like a holiday in a warm country, here's a past thought piece of mine that is just as relevant today as it was back then. And I first posted this in November of 2008. When are we going to wake up and understand that what we take for granted in the first world has zero bearing on the entire rest of the world? I lived in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the final 5+ years of 10 years abroad were spent in Cancun, Mexico, building and running an ad agency there with my now ex-wife. I thought it was interesting that this past week, Mexican authorities asked publicly for the US and UK investigative agencies to help investigate the plane crash that killed Mexico's foremost drug trade fighter, acknowledging that they could use the help as the developing world does not have the luxury of expensive investigative bodies. Their meager tax dollars are spent on more basic needs. And this was in reference to a November 2008 article that was titled Mexico's Interior Secretary Juan Camilo Moreno dies in a plane crash. This brought to mind this old post of mine written at the time of the Llaneros murders near Cancun 2.5 years ago, still apropos today. Canada's RCMP demonstrated some sad naivete back then in suggesting that they could not start an international incident by presuming to jump in and investigate the murders of Nancy and Dominic Llanero in a resort near Playa del Carmen, Mexico, just south of Cancun, by keeping them in the dark about what goes on outside of our pleasant little island of wealthy democracies. The Government of Canada and our RCMP have demonstrated gross negligence, again through their total complacency in the handling of the throat slashings of 2 innocent Canadian tourists vacationing on the Mexican Caribbean. Their cries of international diplomacy and sovereignty are beginning to wear very, very thin. I'm not advocating the American approach of military intervention to protect national interests. I'm saying that there are circumstances under which countries can and must get aggressively proactive in protecting their citizens. Is it a thin line? Yes. Is the diplomatic fallout from such intervention manageable? Certainly, especially when the world stands up and calls the bluff of the corrupt power mongers shouting sovereignty. Hasn't anyone noticed that the most violent protests that are staged over things like the publishing of cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad all take place in countries ruled by totalitarian dictatorships? These are not spontaneous, heartfelt protests by offended believers. They are carefully orchestrated demonstrations of the power of the dictators controlling these nations, aimed at warning the rest of the world of the might that they can exercise through the control of their vast and exponentially expanding populations. We do not often see these kinds of protests in the first world, or even in fledgling democracies, because the burning of first world embassies in developing countries is instigated by the rulers, not by religious beliefs. Get a clue, folks. Outside of our Western cocoon, nothing is what it seems to be on the face of it. It is all about stuffing pockets with cash and stroking the egos of people who are in charge only because of their connections or their ruthlessness. When I first heard about the murders of Dominic and Nancy Llanero, 2 Canadians visiting the Cancun area for their daughter's wedding, I said to my now estranged wife, who lived with me in Mexico for over 5 years, now the circus is going to begin.
One thing is certain, just as the investigation into the disappearance of Natalie Holloway in the summer of 2005 in Aruba went nowhere, this crime is unlikely to ever be solved by the Mexican authorities, quote unquote, unless the real killer comes forward to a first world news service to confess. While the RCMP was sitting on their hands waiting for a polite request for international assistance from the Mexicans, those same local officials were busy sweeping all of the evidence under the rug in order to move on, and quickly. I find it difficult to put the blame on a foreign system concerned with protecting its largest source of foreign income, which is Mexico's tourism industry. I believe that our Canadian police forces and diplomatic corps have an obligation to look after the interests of citizens around the world, something the Americans do conscientiously, but that the overly polite and culturally sensitive Canadian officials are not so great at. Our government has a history of turning a blind eye to the fact that third world judicial and police systems are totally corrupt and do not operate under our first world mandates of fairness, morality, and transparency. The attitude seems to be, well, if you got arrested or attacked in X country, then you probably deserved it, versus, we know these countries to be corrupt, so let's assume that these charges are trumped up and politically motivated and try to protect our citizens' interests. In 2005, I returned to Toronto from 10 years living abroad, the last 5.5 in Cancun, Mexico. And in order to understand what is going on with the police force there, a bit of history will be helpful. Mexico is a developing country. Many Canadians and Americans who visit Mexico for 1 or 2 week holidays see the country as a North American neighbor and get little exposure to the inner workings of government and the public services while there. So they tend to assume that Mexico is not that different from home. Not. Mexico is a country that the Spanish took over in the early 15th century, and it gained independence in 1821. What that meant was that, following the example of their fellow capitalist colonists to the north, the incredibly rich Spanish landowners who had been granted tracts of land and or political power by the Spanish monarchy decided to stop paying tribute taxes to their benefactor in order to keep all the cash they were making by exploiting the natives for themselves. In 1929, following a revolution against the string of dictators who controlled the country since so-called independence, the party that would become the PRI, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, took control and ran the country until the year 2000, when a rival new party, the PRD, Revolutionary Democracy Party, seized power under the leadership of Vicente Fox. Note that it is debatable how separate and distinct Fox's party is from the PRI, as all-powerful people in Mexico got where they are by operating within the sphere of the PRI party's influence. And the PRI's policy for their entire 71-year-long monopoly on power was to keep all sources and all potential sources of profit-making firmly under their absolute control. What this brief historical overview leads up to is that the Mexican police force, at any level, is virtually powerless, since the government does not give them any power. That is because with power, the police force might start keeping tabs on the government and what it is up to. They make almost nothing. Street cop salaries are now about $500 US a month, and no one goes to the police force unless they're prepared, ethically and morally, to supplement their meager incomes with extortion, bribes, and seizing opportunities wherever they present themselves. Fines for any offense from speeding to drug trafficking are just bribes to be negotiated with the officer in charge, and the officer in charge is usually the guy who splits a higher percentage of his take with his boss than his colleagues do in order to secure the most lucrative post or section of highway. On a related note, while I was living in Poland after the Iron Curtain fell some years ago, the RCMP was invited to send a delegation over to help analyze how to help stop corruption in the police force of Poland. After a couple of weeks of intense touring and gathering of information on the problem, the RCMP's principal recommendation was, pay your cops much better salaries and they'll be less likely to demand bribes to feed their families. Back then, the public service employees in Poland did not receive their salaries for months at a time. The vast majority of the top dogs in any significant post in the third world have won the job not through experience, education, hard work in their area of specialty, or for having demonstrated good judgment and intelligence on the job. All of these things have little value outside of the developed world. but rather through family and friend connections. In reference to the In-Arrows murders back in 2006, State Prosecutor Belo Melchor Rodriguez was a notary public who won his position by being tight with the state governor, a member of the PRI party, who, in turn, won his position because his party ran a smear campaign against the People's Choice, the popular mayor of Cancun nicknamed Chacho, that saw Chacho get thrown in jail prior to the election on some ridiculous trumped-up charges, the exact playbook that is used by autocrats everywhere in the world. Are you beginning to see the picture? Senor Melchor Rodriguez was a small fish with no experience as a prosecutor or state politician and has no clue about how to do anything but try to look after the best interests of himself and the people who put him in where he is. And he'd only leapfrog into a cushy federal post by grandstanding in his current position. To paint the picture a bit more clearly, a few years ago, when an expatriate American friend in Playa del Carmen had a problem with a local boat seller, deciding to reclaim his boat after completing a sale due to a payment dispute over malfunctions, the seller paid some off-duty local police to surround the boat in order to prevent the buyer from taking his property back. Hearing that this was going to be the case, the buyer paid the state police to accompany him to collect the boat. The state police arrested the local police for illegal possession of firearms while off duty and carted them off in a paddy wagon, allowing my friend and his burly helpers to hook up the trailer and return home with the boat. Of course, the local police were home again a short time later with somewhat diminished bank accounts. In the same vein, back in 2005, while driving home from a Friday afternoon and evening at the raucous tavernas below Cancun's Bullring, we were stopped by a police officer who, with both hands gripping my car's window frame to keep himself steady, told me with a slur that I was driving under the influence. I said to him, "You've had a lot more to drink than I have, amigo," to which he laughed uproariously and asked what I could do to resolve the situation. I offered him a 50 peso solution, which was about $5 US at the time, which he graciously accepted with a salute and careened off in the direction of the corner store. All stores can sell alcohol in Mexico. The Mexican police are so accommodating that after catching a neighbor in Playa del Carmen for marijuana possession on a Sunday, one of the officers came back to his house on Monday so they could go down to the bank together to take out the $200 US, negotiated down from $2,000 US, required to avoid filling out all that paperwork, as they said, needed to file a charge. There is no judicial system in Mexico or anywhere outside of the Western world as Canadians, Americans, and Europeans know it. Cases are decided by whichever side in the dispute pays the largest bribe to the judge, period. Judges are appointed based on how much they promise to share of the incoming bribes with their politician buddies. So sue me is a common joke there. I was once asked to translate a letter of a reply to an American woman who was hoping to strike it rich by trying to sue a Mexican hotel owner using her American lawyer because she slipped on the wet tile beside the pool on her vacation and claimed to have bumped her head, diminishing her enjoyment of the remainder of her vacation. The response letter basically said, "You seem to be confusing the Mexican judicial system with that of the United States. You cannot win a lawsuit in Mexico. We look forward to hosting you on your next vacation down here. Watch where you are walking in the future." The culture is different in Mexico as a result of this judicial reality. For example, when a dog bites a child, it is taken for granted that the child did something to antagonize the dog, and he or she is patched up and reprimanded for going near dogs. Interestingly, this is the same attitude that our Canadian government takes with its own citizens when we travel to other countries. Be careful over there, because they are our sovereign country, and there's nothing we can do to help you if you get in trouble. Really? Nothing you can do. Just sit on your hands, or wring them, and say, "We told you so," to your tortured, murdered, and assaulted citizens. I'll let you ponder that for a moment, dear reader, but I do suspect there is something our public authorities can do. In Mexico, the police do not do any investigating outside of trying to figure out if there's any money to be made from learning who committed the offenses in question. The year 2000 movie Traffic with Benicio del Toro was a very accurate portrayal of how things work in Mexico. The highest ranking guy in charge of preventing crime is likely the one controlling and benefiting from the illegal activity. The police do not have any decent level of forensic or other training. There is no money in it. The powers that be on the Riviera Maya, where the Canadian couple who was killed, are the local hotel owners and the people governing the area, all of whom want to protect their source of income and pay the police under the table to look after their interests. Even the government of Vicente Fox's 10 federal investigators are largely powerless since, after 71 years of exclusive control of Mexico, the rival PRI party members and their friends own all the assets of the country and control everything, notably the state of Quintana Roo, which conveniently encompasses Mexico's entire Caribbean coastline, has never been out of the PRI's control. This being said, our naive RCMP should have said international jurisdictions be damned and quietly got their butts down to Cancun the day after the killings came to light, since within 24 hours you could be sure all useful evidence would have been conveniently cleaned up to protect the travel industry. It is not as though the RCMP did not have an example to follow with regard to how to handle this kind of incident. In January of 2002, the FBI demonstrated the only way to ensure that the Mexican police get anything done is by assisting them. They flew down to Cancun and drove down the coast to Tulum to assist, quote-unquote, the local forces in arresting Christian Michael Longo for the murders of his wife and children in Oregon, presumably with some money changing hands in order to encourage the participation of the local police, as is the normal practice in most countries outside of the First World. That's the way to get things done outside of the First World. If you follow the rules of the local culture, everything is possible. You just have to take a bag full of cash with you. After seeing that the banditos and bad press can hurt tourism badly, the local authorities have learned that the best preemptive reaction to a potential PR disaster is to immediately deflect blame, ideally by pinning it on someone who has left the country and can be tied in any way possible, in this case by Canadian-Italian nationality, to the victims. They actually do the same thing all the time inside Mexico as well. Once the lie is constructed and the naive foreign press are eating it up, the idea is to stick to it and threaten extradition proceedings against the poor, bewildered, totally innocent Canadian soccer moms who had returned to a different part of Canada the day after the murders, in order to keep attention away from the lack of any search for the Mexican throat slashers living close to the tourist area. The point is not that the state prosecutor, Senor Melchor Rodriguez, was making up bizarre stories about the murders and saying anything that he could to push the blame onto anyone from anywhere. The point is that all the evidence he revealed made it clear that the real killers were local Mexicans. The prosecutor's suggestion that the killers could have been women is patently ridiculous. Any women out to murder someone would never slash the victims' throats. Female killers just don't do that. Women who are mentally deranged have been known to hack off their children's arms or axe murder their family, like Lizzie Borden of old, but these cases are very rare, and these sick women tend to operate alone. What type of people might use an inexpensive weapon such as a knife to murder tourists? Well, perhaps male criminals who aren't rich enough to afford guns and live in areas of the world where machismo is the status quo, such as the poor areas of Mexico just across the highway from the Riviera Maya resorts. That kind of petty criminal has been known to carry knives and use dramatic methods to murder their victims when caught in the midst of a robbery. It likely has nothing to do with this crime, but let's keep in mind just what kind of area and mine site we are dealing with down there. Mexico's Caribbean coast is known to be one of the highest volume transfer points for Colombian drugs being trafficked into the U.S. because it offers a totally corrupt military and police force, thousands of square miles of isolated jungle landing strips and beaches, a network of rarely traveled roads, and a convenient jumping-off point on the north shore of the Yucatan Peninsula for flights, truck routes, and boat trips to the U.S. Nearly pure cocaine is available throughout the area for as little as $20 US a gram because the local mules moving the product are paid with chunks of it cut from the load. Converting this cocaine to crack is simple, and crack is as addictive as heroin is. Take men from families in the jungle of the Yucatan Peninsula with a household income of $100 a month, transport them to a resort area to do maintenance or construction sites where they see how rich the gringo tourists are while they sleep in hammocks inside mosquito-filled shacks made of sticks, and even without mixing crack into their lives, you get a few thugs amongst them with knives in their belts for protection who see nothing wrong with sneaking through the jungle bordering on the large resorts and or along the public beach into the fancy hotel rooms to see what they can steal. And we are not talking about an isolated few poor Mexican workers. There are shanty villages of hundreds of these construction workers lining the highway near the Barcelo resort where these throat slashings took place. The vast majority of these guys are simply innocent family men out to make much more than they can in their villages far away. But human nature being what it is, there are always a couple of guys who are not completely mentally stable among them. The same goes for the thousands of hotel support staff working in the entire area. Oh yes, the prosecutor claims that the motive was not robbery and has mysteriously completely eliminated resort employees as suspects. As the expert local investigators, who tourists at the resort claim never questioned anyone, nor did any kind of sophisticated forensic examination, did not find any evidence of theft. And we believe you 100%, Senor Melcher. If they eliminate petty theft, then the Mexicans have eliminated a simple motive. So they also have said that the murders look like a premeditated hit, which is also believable amongst the Mexicans since the victims' last names were of Italian origin, i.e. they immediately think they must be mafioso. The problem, they quickly learned, with this line of deflection is that the Mexicans did not anticipate that in first world countries we have fairly precise methods in place for keeping track of our average citizens' links to organized crime, and these victims had none. The Mexicans did not ask for any Canadian police help. They didn't ask when Christian Longo was hiding nearby either. For a week, again long enough for any trail to evaporate. TV shows have taught us that if more than 48 hours go by, most crimes become extremely difficult to solve. So the RCMP lost any chance that they might have had to help bring to justice the murderers of two innocent Canadians. The Mexicans also held on to the bodies for a week, presumably in order to find a forensic expert in Mexico with sufficient expertise to cover up any evidence that might lead Canadian forensic pathologists to find leads back to Mexico. And apparently also due to standard Canadian regulations that bodies must be embalmed before being allowed back into Canada for burial. Whoops, RCMP, you might have worked on waiving that rule quickly in this case, or sent one of your own forensic pathologists down there the very same day you caught wind of this atrocity. Get a clue, RCMP. Outside of the Western world, things do not operate according to our civilized rules, as the Americans are discovering painfully in Afghanistan and Iraq. When bad things happen to Canadians outside of first world countries, our police forces have to be as flexible, proactive, and creative at problem solving in order to get our people involved early as the Americans are learning how to be. Maybe the RCMP can now ask the FBI to help them help the Mexicans, but there is unlikely to be any trace left now for anyone to investigate other than investigating the investigation that never took place. And I added an addendum in February of 2013 when more things came to light. In the years following the Inaros murders, the truth gradually floated to the surface of the Mexican officials' bullshit cesspool. The perpetrator was Blas Delgado Fajardo, a former Mexican army paratrooper and bodyguard to the state governor, who was working as a security guard at the resort. He had a fondness for knives, apparently, but was clearly more than a touch psychopathic/psychotic. It should be noted that a dead giveaway was the fact that the murderer never appeared for work the next day. A pretty simple dead giveaway that would have led to an APB going out that might have led to his immediate capture. Despite the Mexican police's gross incompetence, the prospect of financial reward for capturing anyone would have motivated the cops. So the killer was given every opportunity to escape and is believed to have crossed illegally into the U.S. According to his own mother in Mexico, he is likely living as an undocumented illegal with family members in the southern U.S. to this day, very likely killing other innocents as, once having tasted blood, it is difficult for a psychopath to resist the thrill of killing again. Some low-level requests from the RCMP to the FBI to trace this murderer's American family could have very likely led to his capture, but that would have required some interest on the RCMP's part. Be careful out there, folks, and if you get in trouble anywhere in the third world, do not waste a moment calling the Canadian Embassy. Just stroke the egos of the incompetent local officials shamelessly, fill a bag with cash, and you'll be able to help yourself. Thank you so much for watching. And if you got this far, that likely means you have a sincerely curious mind. And curious people tend to be high on the IQ bell curve, which makes you a member of my target audience. If you'd like to comment down below, I'd be more than happy to have an intellectual debate with you. The only thing I'd request is that before you comment, take a moment to consider whether the point you want to make is based upon well-researched facts, scientific evidence, proven effective policies, a balanced, nuanced point of view, and actual intellectual analysis that you've conducted inside your brain, or whether you're simply knee-jerk reacting to hardwiring in your brain that either leans right or leans left, or to dogma that you've been indoctrinated with by religion or someone whose views tend to reflect your brain's hardwiring. Sadly, most people can't control their brain's hardwiring very well, and this is the cause of all of the world's polarization and political battles. I'm a centrist, so I see both sides of most arguments, and I really like talking to other centrists because genuinely progressive, practical solutions come out of those discussions. Talking to hardwired folks on the left or right just leads to shouting matches and frustration. If you've watched a few of my videos and I've managed to change the way that you see the world, even just a little bit, then please consider either clicking on the PayPal link below to buy me a beer or becoming an ongoing patron by clicking on the Patreon link. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you on the other side of the camera again sometime soon. I hope you got something out of my thinking, and if you think I deserve it, please click on the thumbs up sign down below. If you'd like to watch more of my insights into what drives our sometimes peculiar behavior, please click on the links beside me to other videos I've posted. To get notified when I put something new out, click on the subscribe link below me. If you feel inclined to really help me out, do all of the above, as it helps my ranking on YouTube go up.